In the vastness of space, humanity was a young, eager species, full of ambition and hope. But sadly, it was alone. Across the stars, other civilizations flourished. They were ancient and powerful, with technologies far beyond Earth's. These civilizations formed an alliance known as the Galactic Council, a governing body that controlled the flow of knowledge, power, and resources throughout the galaxy. It was a prestigious organization, made up of species that had existed for millennia. And yet, humanity had never been welcomed into their fold. The Earth and its colonies had been rejected time and time again. At first, it was out of pity. The Earthlings were too new, too unrefined, too full of conflict to be trusted. They were chaotic, unpredictable, and sometimes violent. These traits, while common in the early stages of any species development, had caused the Council to consider humanity as an unstable and unworthy candidate for membership. No matter how much progress humanity made, they were always looked at as outsiders, forever excluded from the greater cosmic family. It wasn't that the Earthlings didn't try to be part of the greater galactic community. They sent diplomats, ambassadors, and missions to distant worlds. They built ships that could travel across vast distances, their technology advancing rapidly compared to their humble beginnings. But each time they reached out, they were turned away. The message was always the same. You are not ready. You are too immature. You have not earned your place. On one such mission, Captain Elara Holt, a respected leader of a scientific expedition fleet, found herself standing on the edge of something monumental. She had been sent to explore a distant star system, far beyond the reach of any known Council worlds. The mission was routine, surveying uncharted space for potential resources and conducting basic research. But it was during this mission that Holt's crew stumbled upon something unexpected, something that would change their lives forever. They had discovered a planet, its surface scarred by war and natural disasters. Its skies were dark with storms, and the oceans had dried up. What was most shocking, however, was the discovery of life. There, among the ruins of a once thriving civilization, were the Eloria, a species that appeared humanoid, but their features were distinct. Their skin was a shimmering silver, their eyes bright and unblinking, glowing softly in the darkness. The Eloria were a peaceful race, known for their advanced intellect and spiritual wisdom. However, they had been abandoned by every major civilization, left to die alone on their decaying world. The Eloria had once been a thriving race, respected and revered by those who encountered them. Their technology had been on par with the most advanced of the galaxy. But during a period of great expansion, the Eloria had uncovered a dangerous truth about the universe, one that threatened the very foundations of the interstellar peace that the Galactic Council had worked so hard to establish. Fearing the knowledge the Eloria had uncovered, the Council had turned their backs on the peaceful species, leaving them to perish in isolation. For years, the Eloria had sent out signals, begging for help, but their calls went unanswered. Every civilization that might have helped them chose to look the other way. Earth, despite its own struggles, had not been different. The humans had been too busy, too focused on their own survival, to notice the suffering of another race. The Eloria's pleas were lost in the noise of an uncaring galaxy. However, Captain Holt and her crew could not ignore the Eloria's plight. As they explored the planet's surface, they discovered the ruins of an ancient civilization, with records that detailed the species' history and their eventual downfall. The Eloria had once been among the most powerful and respected species in the galaxy, but after the Council abandoned them, they had become weak, their once great cities now just skeletons of what they used to be. The humans were faced with a choice: ignore the Eloria, as every other civilization had done, or take a stand and offer them the help they so desperately needed. Holt knew that by offering this help, humanity would likely face the wrath of the Council. But the more she learned about the Eloria, the more she realized that they were not just another abandoned race. They held the key to something far greater. The Eloria knew things, secrets that no other species had discovered, things that could change the course of the galaxy forever. Despite the risks, Holt made the decision to offer the Eloria sanctuary. She knew that if humanity did nothing, the Eloria would disappear into the void, their knowledge and wisdom lost forever. And so, Captain Holt sent a message to Earth, urging her superiors to allow her crew to protect the Eloria, to provide them with a new home where they could rebuild, learn, and perhaps even share their knowledge with humanity. But this decision would not come easily. The Galactic Council's rejection of humanity was not just a matter of pride. It was a matter of control. Any attempt to intervene in the Eloria's plight would surely provoke a response, a dangerous one. Yet Holt couldn't turn back. She had made her choice. Humanity would stand with the Eloria, no matter the consequences. And so, the journey of protection and survival began. Captain Elara Holt sat in the command chair of the Starseeker, her ship gazing at the screen in front of her. The Eloria homeworld was in the distance, a desolate planet, but it held a deep mystery. The species was dying, abandoned by all the advanced civilizations of the galaxy, left to perish alone. Earth had always stood apart from the other galactic powers, more independent, more rebellious. And now, Holt faced a decision that could shape the future of humanity. As the captain, she had made a commitment to protect those who could not protect themselves, but the Eloria's situation was more complicated than anything she had encountered before. Her mission was supposed to be a simple exploration. The crew had found signs of an abandoned world, a dying civilization, but now it had turned into something much greater, a moral dilemma. The galaxy had long ignored the Eloria. The Galactic Council, the governing body of the major galactic civilizations, had written them off as a failed race, unworthy of help. This wasn't just about saving a species. It was about defying every law, every order the Council had set. And if Holt made the wrong choice, it could mean an end to humanity's already fragile position in the galaxy. Sitting beside Holt was her trusted first officer, Lieutenant Jarek, a man who had served under her for years. His face was tense, his brow furrowed with concern. "Captain, we can't do this," Jarek said, his voice low. "We don't have the resources to protect the Eloria, and you know the Council will react harshly if they learn of this." Holt looked at him, her eyes resolute. "I can't just leave them to die. The Eloria may have their flaws, but they were once respected. They were once part of something greater. They don't deserve this fate." She paused, thinking of the discoveries they had made. The Eloria held knowledge that could change the course of history, knowledge that humanity might one day need. But more importantly, they were a people who had been left to fade into the darkness of the galaxy. "Captain," Jarek continued, "I understand, but we have to consider what this will mean for Earth. We're already seen as a rogue species. We can't afford to challenge the Council. If we offer them refuge, the other civilizations will see us as a threat." Holt's expression softened, but her determination didn't waver. The Council doesn't care about the Eloria. They never did. They care about control. And that's what this is really about. If we do nothing, we're no better than the others who turned their backs on them. The conversation had been growing heavier with each passing minute. Holt was aware of the risks, and she knew that by going against the Council, she was walking a dangerous path. The Eloria's history was full of lost opportunities. They had once been allies to the Council, but their discoveries had frightened the powerful members. They had unlocked something ancient and terrifying, a secret buried deep within the universe, and the Council had decided that it was better to abandon them rather than deal with the consequences of that knowledge. Still, Holt knew she could not simply ignore their plight. The Eloria were not just a race of beings to be discarded. They were intelligent, wise, and in their own way kind. They deserved a chance to rebuild, a chance to survive, just as humanity had fought for its place in the stars. Holt had no doubt that helping the Eloria was the right thing to do, no matter the risks involved. The decision was clear to her now. She turned to Jarek. "We're going to help them, no matter the consequences. I'll inform the Earth government and tell them what we're doing. If we have to face the wrath of the Council, then we will. But I won't let this be another failure for us. Not again. Jarek didn't respond immediately. He understood Holt's sense of duty, her moral compass. But the consequences of this decision would not be easy. As the first officer, it was his job to warn her when she was on the brink of making a dangerous move. And this was undoubtedly one of those times. Captain, the Council is ruthless. They don't forgive betrayal. I'm not betraying them, Holt said firmly. I'm doing what's right. If humanity is to have any future among the stars, we must show them that we stand for something greater than ourselves. The crew had begun preparations to move the Aloria from their dying world to a safer location, but Holt knew this would only be the first step in a much larger journey. She could feel the weight of her decision settling on her shoulders. There would be no turning back now. In the coming hours, she sent a transmission to Earth's government, explaining what they had discovered and what they planned to do. As expected, the response was cautious, filled with hesitation. Earth's leaders were not ready to make an open stand against the Galactic Council. However, they also could not ignore the reality of the situation. Holt was ordered to proceed cautiously, but was reminded that any hostile action against the Council would result in severe consequences. Despite the warnings, Holt made her move. She ordered the Starseeker and its sister ships to begin the evacuation process, transporting the Aloria to a hidden location far from the Council's reach. It would take time, and there would be many obstacles. But Holt was resolute. The Aloria had been abandoned by the galaxy, but humanity was not going to turn its back on them. As the ships prepared to depart, Captain Holt gazed at the planet below. It was a final goodbye to a dying world, and the beginning of a new, uncertain path. No one knew what awaited them. But one thing was clear. Humanity had just taken its first step towards something far bigger than they had ever imagined. The Starseeker and its fleet moved in quiet formation through the vast expanse of space, leaving the dying planet of the Aloria behind. The crew worked in near silence, their tasks clear but their minds filled with uncertainty. Captain Ilara Holt stood on the bridge, watching the stars streak by, her thoughts heavy with the decision she had made. The mission to protect the Aloria had only just begun, and already she knew it was going to be more difficult than she had ever imagined. Holt glanced over at Lieutenant Jarek, who was standing by the command console, tracking the fleet's course. He had been her trusted first officer for years, and she could sense his unease. He had been the one to voice his doubts when they first discovered the Aloria, and though he had reluctantly supported her decision, the weight of their actions was now pressing down on him as much as it was on her. "Captain, we're receiving a message from Earth," Jarek said, his voice strained. "They've acknowledged our request to provide sanctuary for the Aloria. But there's something strange about the tone." Holt's heart skipped a beat. Earth's government had given her the green light to proceed, but the message didn't sound like the reassurance she had hoped for. She motioned for Jarek to open the transmission. The screen flickered, and a stern-looking officer appeared. He was a high-ranking member of Earth's governing council, his face grim as he spoke. "Captain Holt," he began, his voice steady but full of warning. "We understand your desire to help the Aloria, but you must be aware of the consequences. The Galactic Council does not tolerate defiance. If you continue down this path, you will be branded as traitors. Earth will have to sever all ties with you and your fleet. We will not be able to offer you any support if you face retaliation." Holt felt the weight of the officer's words. She had expected resistance, but the gravity of their threat was real. The officer paused for a moment, then added, "However, we also understand that this is a moral issue. You've made your decision, and we cannot stop you. But know that you do so alone." The transmission ended, and the silence on the bridge was deafening. Holt could feel the tension in the air. The decision to help the Aloria had already cost her the support of her government. But she was resolute. She couldn't turn back now. "We knew this wouldn't be easy," Holt said quietly, turning to face her crew. "The path ahead is uncertain, but it's the right thing to do. We stand by our decision." Jarek nodded but couldn't hide his worry. The Eloria may need our help, but we need to be prepared. We can't afford to make mistakes. The Galactic Council won't hesitate to destroy us if they find out." Holt agreed. The challenge ahead wasn't just protecting the Eloria. It was keeping their actions a secret from the Council. The fleet's mission was now a delicate balance of survival and stealth. They couldn't let anyone know what they were doing. The first mistake could be their last. As the days passed, Holt's crew worked tirelessly to transport the Eloria to their new sanctuary. The fleet's resources were stretched thin, and every ship was on high alert. But there was a shared sense of purpose among the crew. They were no longer just explorers or soldiers. They were protectors of a forgotten race, a race that had once been great and now sought only a chance to rebuild. The Eloria, for their part, were grateful but confused. Their once proud civilization had been reduced to a few scattered survivors. Their world, once a shining example of progress and knowledge, was now a shattered wasteland. They had no place left to call home. Holt had promised them safety, but she couldn't help but wonder how much longer they would be able to keep that promise. Captain Holt met with the Eloria's leader, a wise elder named Lyrican, in one of the ship's observation rooms. Lyrican's silver skin glistened softly in the dim light, and her bright eyes reflected the quiet sadness of her people. "Captain Holt," Lyrican said, her voice calm but tinged with sorrow, "your actions mean more to us than you can understand. We have been abandoned by those we once called allies. We thought we were alone in this galaxy, left to fade away in the emptiness. But you, humans, you have given us hope. You have reminded us that kindness and compassion still exist." Holt shook her head. "We're just doing what's right. You deserve better than what the galaxy has given you. You deserve a chance to rebuild." Lyrican nodded slowly. "We were once a great race, but now we are but whispers in the dark. We fear that our knowledge, our history, will die with us. Perhaps that is the way of the universe, to be forgotten." Holt placed a hand on the elder's shoulder. "Your history will not die. We will help you rebuild. And your knowledge." She paused, looking around at the quiet stars outside the ship's windows. "Your knowledge will not be lost. We'll make sure of that." As the fleet moved deeper into uncharted space, Holt and her crew worked together with the Eloria to establish a new home for them. It was a remote location, far from the prying eyes of the Galactic Council, but the Eloria would have the chance to rebuild. The stars, once an overwhelming and uncaring expanse, now seemed to offer a glimmer of hope. But even as they moved forward, Holt couldn't shake the feeling that danger was closing in. The Eloria were now under their protection, and they would do whatever it took to keep them safe, no matter the cost. The fleet had traveled for weeks, deep into uncharted space, far beyond the reach of the Galactic Council's patrols. Captain Holt had done everything in her power to ensure their secrecy, but a quiet tension hung in the air. The mission to protect the Eloria was progressing, but every passing day brought new challenges. The Eloria, though grateful, were still adjusting to their new lives among the humans. They had once ruled a flourishing civilization, and now they were refugees, with no place to call home. Holt stood on the bridge of the Starseeker, gazing at the star charts on the display screen. The fleet had found a remote planet to settle the Eloria, a world with rich resources and a calm atmosphere, perfect for rebuilding. But even as the planet neared, Holt knew that the greatest threat to their safety was not the unknown world ahead. It was the vast, unseen power of the Galactic Council. She had hoped that Earth's government might step in to support them, but the communication had been clear. Earth was unwilling to risk open defiance of the Council. Humanity's fragile place in the galaxy was not strong enough to stand against the power of the Council. If the Council found out where the Eloria were being hidden, they would destroy them, and perhaps even humanity along with them. "Captain, we've received a transmission," Lieutenant Jurek called from his console. His voice was tight, betraying a hint of worry. Holt turned quickly. "Is it from Earth?" "No, Captain," Jurek replied, his eyes scanning the incoming message. "It's from a Galactic Council monitoring station. They're asking about the Aloria. Holt's heart skipped a beat. The council had already taken notice. She knew that the next few moments could determine everything. If they suspected the fleet's involvement, it would mean the end for the Aloria and the crew. "Put it through," Holt ordered, her voice calm but firm. The screen flickered to life, and a sharp, calculating voice echoed from the other side. The figure that appeared was tall and imposing, with a dark, cloaked appearance that made it hard to distinguish their species. One thing was clear: the figure represented the power of the council. Their eyes glowed with an unsettling light, and their voice carried the weight of authority. "Captain Holt," the voice said, cold and emotionless, "we are aware of your actions. You have been involved in the relocation of the Aloria. You are in direct violation of Galactic Council policy. Your actions have not gone unnoticed." Holt's mind raced. She couldn't show fear. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice steady, but inside she was preparing for the worst. She had to buy time. She had to protect the Aloria, no matter the cost. The figure on the screen did not flinch. "Do not lie to us, Captain. We have eyes everywhere. The Aloria were once a trusted ally, but they became a threat. They knew too much. Their knowledge is dangerous. You have no right to harbor them. You will return them to us at once." Holt felt a chill run down her spine. She knew the council had abandoned the Aloria long ago. It was true that the Aloria had uncovered something that the council feared, and that knowledge had been the reason for their fall from grace. The council had chosen to destroy the Aloria rather than deal with the consequences of what they had learned. "We are not returning them to you," Holt said, her voice unwavering. "They have done nothing wrong. You abandoned them. They deserve to live in peace." The figure's eyes narrowed, their voice dropping to a low, menacing tone. "You are playing a dangerous game, Captain. The Council does not tolerate disobedience. If you do not comply, we will ensure that your fleet is destroyed." The transmission cut off abruptly, leaving the bridge in stunned silence. Holt stood frozen for a moment, processing the threat. It was clear now that the Council had no intention of negotiating. They would come for the Aloria, and they would stop at nothing to find them. Jarek turned to her, his face pale. "Captain, we've been discovered. They're going to hunt us down." Holt took a deep breath, trying to steady her nerves. "We won't give them the Aloria. We're not running anymore. If the Council wants to destroy us, then they'll have to come through us first." Her words hung in the air, filled with a grim resolve. The fleet was far from prepared for a direct conflict with the Council. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and outmatched. But Holt had seen the Aloria's despair, heard their stories of abandonment and betrayal. She couldn't let them return to the Council's cruelty. She couldn't let humanity become just another footnote in the galaxy's history, forgotten and discarded. "Set a course for the planet," Holt ordered. "We'll make our stand there. Prepare the fleet for any potential attack." As the fleet altered its course toward the remote planet, the crew moved swiftly to prepare. They worked together with a sense of urgency, knowing that time was running out. The Aloria watched in silence, sensing the shift in the air. They knew that the Council's wrath would be swift, and that no place was truly safe from the vast power of the galaxy's ruling body. But Holt's resolve was firm. She wasn't going to abandon the Aloria. They had been abandoned by the galaxy once, but they would not be left to die again. As the fleet moved forward, Holt looked out at the stars, a fire burning in her heart. She wasn't just fighting for the Aloria anymore. She was fighting for humanity's right to stand on its own, to make its own choices, and to protect those who needed it most. The shadows of the Council were closing in, but Holt knew one thing. They were not going to go down without a fight. The fleet had settled into the orbit of the remote planet, its barren surface stretched below like an empty canvas, waiting for the next chapter to unfold. Captain Elara Holt stood on the observation deck of the Starseeker, staring out at the desolate world below. It was a quiet, uninhabited planet, perfect for hiding the Aloria from the prying eyes of the Galactic Council. The dark skies and the constant storm clouds that circled the planet gave it an eerie, almost foreboding feeling. But it was the best chance they had to protect the Aloria. The crew had done everything they could to prepare for what was to come. Weapons were checked, shields were calibrated, and the fleet's engines were powered down to avoid detection. They were as ready as they could be. Yet, Holt couldn't shake the feeling that something was looming, that the calm before the storm would be short-lived. "We've secured the planet's atmosphere, Captain," Lieutenant Jurek reported, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "All ships are in position. The Aloria are settling into the underground shelters we've prepared for them. We've done all we can to hide our presence." Holt nodded. It had been a long few weeks, and the crew had worked tirelessly to ensure the Aloria's safety. The underground shelters were well hidden, surrounded by miles of rocky terrain that would make it nearly impossible for any search party to find them. But Holt knew that the Galactic Council had resources that were far beyond anything humanity could imagine. They would find them if they were looking hard enough. "I want constant surveillance," Holt ordered, turning to face Jurek. "We can't afford to miss anything. If the Council detects us, we need to know as soon as possible." Jurek nodded and moved to his station to carry out the order. Holt turned her attention back to the vast emptiness of space, feeling the weight of the decision she had made. The Aloria were safe, for now, but the risk of being discovered was ever present. They couldn't remain here forever. As the hours passed, Holt tried to push her worries aside. The fleet had made its stand, and now they had to focus on keeping the Aloria hidden. They couldn't fight the Council's power directly, but they could outblast them, survive long enough to find a way to push back. Suddenly, the calm atmosphere of the bridge was broken by an urgent beeping sound. Holt's heart raced as Jurek's voice came through the comms. "Captain, we've detected a fleet. It's approaching our position. I don't recognize the signature, but it's large." Holt's stomach tightened. She turned to face Jurek, who was already analyzing the data on his screen. "What's their course?" "They're heading straight for us," Jurek replied, his face pale. "We've also picked up a transmission. It's from the Galactic Council." The message was blunt and clear. They knew exactly where the fleet was and what they were hiding. The Council had found them. "Set condition red," Holt ordered, her voice sharp. "All ships, prepare for a possible attack. I want our shields up and weapons primed. We don't know how many ships are out there, but we're not going down without a fight." The crew sprang into action. The Starseeker and the other ships in the fleet activated their defense systems, their weapons glowing with readiness. Holt could feel the tension rising as they prepared for whatever was coming. She knew the Council wouldn't hesitate to destroy them if they felt threatened. She turned to Lieutenant Jurek, who was working furiously at his console. "Can we hold them off?" she asked. Jurek didn't look up from his screen, but his voice was calm. "We're outnumbered, Captain. Even with our shields and weapons at full power, we won't be able to hold them off for long. But I'll make sure we can buy as much time as possible." "Do what you can," Holt said, her voice resolute. "We've got one chance to protect the Aloria. We can't let them get to the planet." As the incoming fleet grew closer, Holt couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. The fleet was large, larger than anything they had encountered before. She knew the Council's military strength, and this was not something they could simply outfight. They had no choice but to defend the Aloria as best they could and hope that they could survive long enough to find a way out. A low hum filled the bridge as the Starseeker powered up its engines and weapons systems. The crew waited in tense silence, eyes fixed on their stations, ears tuned to the sound of the enemy fleet approaching. The Aloria, hidden beneath the surface, had no idea of the danger that was drawing closer. Holt hoped that they wouldn't have to face the worst-case scenario, that the Council's ships wouldn't land and destroy everything they had worked for. "Captain," Jurek called out, his voice tense, "we've identified the enemy fleet. It's a standard Galactic Council strike group, 6 ships, heavily armed. We've also detected a large, unidentified vessel at the rear of the group. It's not typical for Council fleets to operate this way. I don't know what they're planning, but it's not good. Holt felt the pressure mounting. The Council had come for them, and now the fleet was preparing to defend their new home with everything they had. They'll be here in less than an hour, Jarek continued. What are your orders, Captain? Holt's mind raced. She knew they couldn't win this fight, not against such overwhelming odds. But she couldn't let the Eloria die, not after everything they had been through. We fight, she said firmly. We hold them off for as long as we can. We'll give the Eloria more time to hide, more time to survive. No matter what, we don't back down. The bridge fell silent as the crew prepared for battle. Holt's heart pounded in her chest. The storm was coming, and this time there would be no running away. The fleet was ready to face the consequences of their actions, ready to stand and fight for the Eloria's future, no matter the cost. The fleet of the Galactic Council loomed on the edge of the atmosphere, their enormous ships filling the view on the Starseeker's sensor grid. Captain Ilara Holt stood at the command center, her fists clenched as she watched the ships approach. The countdown had begun. There was no turning back now. Captain, we've detected energy signatures on all ships, Lieutenant Jarek reported, his voice calm but with an edge of worry. They're preparing to fire. We need to act fast. Holt's mind raced. The Council's fleet was massive, its firepower overwhelming. Even if they fought with everything they had, the Starseeker and the fleet couldn't stand against such a force. But Holt knew one thing for sure. They would protect the Eloria, no matter the cost. They couldn't allow the Council to destroy their new home. Not after everything they had fought for. Raise the shields, Holt ordered, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. Prepare for a full defensive stance. We'll give them a fight they won't forget. The crew scrambled to their stations, and within moments, the fleet's shields were activated, glowing with a faint blue light. Holt felt a flicker of hope. They might be outmatched, but they weren't going down without a fight. The battle began with a flash of light. The Council ships fired their first volley, sending pulses of energy hurtling toward the fleet. The Starseeker rocked as the first blast hit, but the shields held strong. The impact rattled the crew, but they quickly regained their composure and returned fire. Target their lead ship, Holt commanded, her eyes never leaving the enemy vessels on the screen. We'll focus all our firepower on that one. It's the largest, and taking it down will throw them into disarray. Jarek nodded and quickly relayed the order to the rest of the fleet. Energy beams lit up the dark expanse of space as they raced toward the Lid Council ship. The blasts hit with force, but the Council ship's shields absorbed most of the damage. They're retaliating, Jarek warned. All ships are firing. We've got multiple incoming. Holt's breath caught in her throat as the enemy's energy beams rained down on the fleet. The Starseeker shook violently as another blast slammed into its hull. Sparks flew from the control panels, and the crew scrambled to keep their systems running. Damage report. Holt barked, refusing to let the situation overwhelm her. Shields are holding at 70%, Captain, Jarek said quickly. But we've taken damage to the starboard engines. We can't maneuver as easily. Understood, Holt replied. Keep the shields up as long as you can. We need to keep our enemies at bay. The Starseeker returned fire with everything it had, its energy weapons sending beams of pure energy toward the Council fleet. The smaller ships in the fleet followed suit, their guns firing in unison. The battle raged on, a chaotic clash of light and sound in the dark emptiness of space. Despite their best efforts, the Starseeker and its fleet were slowly being overwhelmed. The Council's firepower was too much. Holt could see the enemy ships drawing closer, their weapons charging for another strike. They were closing in, and the odds of survival were shrinking by the second. Captain, Jarek said urgently, we can't keep this up much longer. We need to fall back and regroup, or we'll lose everything. Holt gritted her teeth. She hated the thought of retreating. It felt like giving up, like letting the Eloria down. But she knew Jarek was right. They needed to buy time. The only chance they had left was to survive long enough to make a plan. "Order the fleet to fall back," she said, her voice trained but firm. "We'll retreat to the planet's surface. It's our best chance to regroup." The order was relayed, and the fleet slowly began to retreat, their engines roaring to life as they moved toward the planet below. But the Council ships didn't give them a moment's rest. They continued to fire, chasing the fleet as it descended toward the planet's atmosphere. "We've got incoming," Jarek shouted, his eyes wide with alarm. "They're trying to take us down before we reach the surface." The fleet's shields absorbed some of the incoming blasts, but the strain was starting to show. The Starseeker's hull groaned under the pressure, and its engines sputtered as the ship descended lower into the atmosphere. The surface of the planet was fast approaching, and Holt knew they had to land or risk being shot out of the sky. "Prepare for impact," Holt ordered, bracing herself for the inevitable. The Starseeker plummeted toward the surface, its engines firing in a desperate attempt to slow its descent. The ground below was rocky, uneven, and full of dangerous craters. There was no smooth landing, no perfect place to settle. Holt could only hope they would survive the landing. With a tremendous crash, the Starseeker hit the planet's surface, sending a shockwave through the ship. The crew was thrown against their seats as alarms blared and lights flickered. Holt's head spun, but she quickly regained her composure. "Damage report," she shouted, her voice hoarse. "We've crash-landed," Jarek said, still trying to gather his bearings. "Engines are offline. Shields are down. We're stuck here." Holt nodded grimly. The Starseeker had survived, but it was a wreck, and the rest of the fleet had landed hard too. The Council ships were still up there, searching for them, and it wouldn't be long before they came down to finish the job. But Holt's resolve was unshaken. They had made it to the surface, and now they had a fighting chance. The Eloria were hidden deep underground, and for the first time in weeks, the fleet had some semblance of safety. "We fight on the ground," Holt said, standing tall. "We're not done yet. Prepare for a ground defense. We'll make sure the Eloria stay safe." The battle for survival was far from over. The storm had only just begun. The dust settled around the wreckage of the Starseeker. The once mighty ship now a twisted skeleton of metal and broken parts. The fleet had crash-landed on the planet's surface, and the crew was scattered across the rough, rocky terrain. Captain Elara Holt stood outside the wreckage, her eyes scanning the dark horizon. The sounds of distant explosions echoed in the distance, reminders that the battle was far from over. The Galactic Council had landed on the planet, and they were hunting for the fleet. "We've got no time to waste," Holt said to Lieutenant Jarek, who had joined her outside. "Get everyone to their positions. We need to make sure the Eloria are safe and hidden. We won't let the Council take them." Jarek nodded, his face grim but determined. "Understood, Captain. We'll set up the perimeter defense. We'll need to act fast." The Starseeker was in no condition to continue fighting, and the rest of the fleet was similarly damaged. But Holt knew that the Eloria's safety was the only priority now. They couldn't let the Council find them, couldn't let them destroy everything they had worked so hard to protect. The rocky landscape stretched for miles, with jagged cliffs and deep ravines providing some cover. The Eloria were hidden underground, deep within a network of caves. Holt had prepared for just such a situation. They had to stay hidden until the battle was over. Holt's heart ached for them. They were a peaceful people, displaced by a cruel galaxy, and now they were caught in the middle of a war they had never asked for. As the crew began fortifying their positions, Holt looked out over the horizon again. The Council ships were circling above, their massive shadows darkening the landscape. It wouldn't be long before they began their search. Holt couldn't afford to let the enemy find the Eloria. "Captain," Jarek called, returning to her side. "We've set up a defensive perimeter. The team's ready. But the Council's forces are getting closer. We can't hold out forever." "I know," Holt said, her voice steady. "But we'll hold out long enough. We'll buy the Eloria the time they need." The crew had worked quickly, setting up a series of energy barriers and defensive turrets around the area where the Aloria were hiding. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. Holt knew they couldn't defeat the Council head-on, but they could make it difficult for the enemy to reach their people. Suddenly, a loud rumble shook the ground beneath their feet. The sound of approaching forces grew louder, and Holt knew the time had come. The Council's soldiers were advancing. "Everyone, get to your positions," Holt shouted, pulling her blaster from its holster. The crew moved quickly, taking their places behind the barriers and turrets. Holt's eyes narrowed as she watched the distant shadows of the Council's forces moving closer. "They're almost here," Jarek said, his voice tense. "What's the plan, Captain?" Holt paused for a moment, considering their options. They couldn't fight the Council's full force directly, but they could slow them down, force them into a trap. They had to draw the enemy's attention away from the Aloria. "We need to divide their forces," Holt said, her mind working quickly. "We'll create a diversion and lead them into the ravine to the east. We can trap them there and take out their advanced troops. Jarek, you lead the diversion team. I'll stay behind and defend the Aloria." Jarek nodded. "Understood. We'll give them everything we've got." The sounds of the approaching Council forces grew louder as they neared the defensive perimeter. Holt's heart pounded in her chest, but her focus remained unshaken. She had one goal: protect the Aloria, no matter what. The battle began in a blaze of energy blasts. Holt watched as Jarek and his team launched their diversion, firing energy beams into the sky to draw the Council's attention. The Council soldiers, clad in heavy armor, charged forward, their blasters aimed at the crew's defensive positions. Holt and the remaining crew members opened fire, sending blast after blast toward the advancing troops. The sound of weapons clashing filled the air as the Council forces closed in, their powerful weapons cutting through the air. But Holt and her team stood firm, defending the hidden Aloria with every ounce of strength they had. The diversion worked. The enemy was focused on the trap Jarek had set, and Holt could see the Council's soldiers being drawn into the ravine, just as planned. The crew continued to hold their ground, firing relentlessly and forcing the enemy to fight on their terms. But the fight was far from over. As the Council's soldiers began to regroup, Holt knew they were running out of time. She had to keep pushing them back, had to keep them distracted until the Aloria were safe. "We're holding them off, but they're pushing harder now." Jarek's voice crackled over the comms. "Just a little longer," Holt called back, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "We can't let up now. Hold your positions." The ground shook again as the Council's forces sent in reinforcements, overwhelming the crew's defenses. Holt's team was exhausted, but they didn't back down. They fought with everything they had, using the terrain to their advantage, positioning themselves for one last stand. And then, just when it seemed like the tide would turn against them, a new sound reached Holt's ears. It was a faint hum at first, but it grew louder, closer. She turned toward the source, her eyes widening in disbelief. A fleet of human ships appeared over the horizon, their weapons primed and ready. Earth had come to their aid. "We're not alone," Holt shouted, her heart soaring. "It's Earth. Reinforcements are here." The Council forces faltered as the new ships arrived, their firepower overwhelming the Council's forces. The enemy quickly realized they were no longer facing a small Ragdig fleet. They were up against the full force of Earth's military. With reinforcements on their side, Holt and her crew pushed forward, forcing the Council forces to retreat. The battle raged on, but with Earth's help, the tide had turned in their favor. As the last of the enemy forces were driven back, Holt took a deep breath, her body heavy with exhaustion. The Aloria were safe. Humanity had stood with them, and together they had won. The war wasn't over, but for now, they had a victory. They had proven that even against the greatest of odds, humanity would fight for what was right, and that, in the end, made all the difference.